North Carolina, in a recent report, has had a history of scoring very well when it comes to business analytics. That trend continued last week when the 17th edition of the Rich States, Poor States showed North Carolina fourth of the country in economic outlook and 11th in performance. There are variables that are used in this report. We're going to get some of that information right now as we welcome in our next guest. Lee Schalk is with the group behind this. Lee, good morning to you. Thank you for taking a little bit of time with us here this morning on Talk of the Town.
Good morning from the nation's capital. Looking forward to diving into our new rankings.
So, what is used to calculate, Lee, these rankings?
Well, for 17 years now, we've been doing this report, and I should also add, happy belated tax day. We put this report out. For those who celebrate, it depends on what state you're in. Of course, all of us paying the federal income taxes and the heavy-handed approach from Washington does not give us a lot to celebrate on tax day, obviously. But for 17 years, Rich States, Poor States has shown us a roadmap of what's working and what's not working at the state level. And I think at the heart of the report, what we really believe, and I think what the report demonstrates, is that the states are competing with one another when it comes to economic policy and their efforts to attract job creators and new residents. And we really see, as you look at the report and comparing all 50 states on their economic policies, you can really see what's working and what's not. And North Carolina did very well in the report again this year. We look at things like income tax rates, worker freedom policies, government spending, and all of that factors into the state's economic outlook.
When you talk about performance, and North Carolina is just outside the top 10 in that metric or in that ranking, I assume everything you just talked about that you consider how that computes and what that essentially equates to is what you get the performance part out of?
That's right. So the performance ranking is looking backwards at how the state did last year or over the last decade in some cases. So we're looking at things like how the economy has grown, how many jobs have been added, and how many residents the state has gained on net over the last decade. And in that regard, North Carolina has really exploded with growth. If you look at the last 10 years, nearly 700,000 new residents on net have moved to the state of North Carolina. And I think one of the reasons for that, you can also go back 10 years, and we remember when Governor Pat McCrory was in office and he signed a historic tax reform package back in 2013. And at that time, North Carolina had some of the highest income tax rates in the Southeast, one of the most economically competitive regions in the country. But since that time, North Carolina's income tax rates have continued to fall thanks to leaders in Raleigh and some bipartisan budget deals. And so today, you've got a personal income tax rate that is under 5% and a corporate income tax rate at 2.5%, which is the lowest of any state in the country that still levies a corporate income tax.
We've got Lee Schalk, Vice President of Policy, American Legislative Exchange Council, is with us here on this Talk of the Town Tuesday. And we're talking about North Carolina and where it compares in their latest report, Rich States, Poor States, and the analytics of business in North Carolina. All of this contributes to a climate and a willingness to obviously do business. You know, incentives have long been bantied about here in the state. But it's how you are in the game now. Are you finding that the states that are succeeding are providing these tax breaks and major incentives to companies to move in, or is this more geared towards, growing what is currently in a respective state?
I certainly do see that as a trend across the country. I think from our perspective, the best thing a state can do is, avoid the temptation to pick winners and losers and complicate your tax code with additional carve-outs that may be, a one-time deal to attract a certain company or folks from a certain industry. But the best thing you can do, in my view, is to lower taxes across the board. Provide those lower rates to all taxpayers, to all businesses, both large and small businesses alike. There's really no downside to letting taxpayers and businesses and workers keep more of their hard-earned paychecks. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, those across-the-board income tax cuts, North Carolina used to have a progressive income tax structure. The highest earners paying, 7.75%, but condensing that into a single bracket and then lowering the rates for everyone. We really see the proof is in the pudding. The economic growth that has occurred in North Carolina over the last decade has really been off the charts. And so I think the overarching principle here is when we can, it's essential, I believe, to avoid picking winners and losers. But you do see that as a very common trend when it comes to offering incentives.
Lee, it is North Carolina's performed very, very well if you go back and look at past reports. And it's up there with some other states who have also been consistently at the top of this survey. What is the common thread that North Carolina shares with some of these other states?
Yeah, North Carolina, as you mentioned, probably the biggest comeback story we've seen in 17 years of doing this report, ranking as low as 26th for economic outlook. Again, that's going back before the tax reform package in 2013, getting as high as number 2 in the country last year, number 4 this year. But I think across the board, you see states that keep income taxes low. They are right to work states. That's very important. They have worker freedom policies. They've not chased the fight for 15 on the minimum wage. Some states have gone even beyond that. And also, they're getting the spending side of the equation correct, too. Taxes and spending are really two sides of the same fiscal coin. And so when it comes to budget season in a state capital, it's really important for our elected officials to be good stewards of our hard-earned tax dollars. And so I think that is another common thread that we see across the board. Property taxes, a huge challenge for most states, and probably the most hated tax of all when you survey Americans. But the states that do well and are positioned with strong economic outlook, they don't have they probably don't have the suffocating property tax burdens that we might see in a place like New York or New Jersey.
Lee, as far as the top 3 ahead of North Carolina, Utah, Idaho, and Arizona, they're all out west. North Carolina is in the top 5 and is obviously an East Coast state. And then you have Florida in the performance rankings was first. Where did Florida stack up in the overall outlook?
Florida still is a top 10 state for us. But as you mentioned, in performance, Florida has just, it's been going gangbusters in terms of attracting new residents. And I think this trend, as I mentioned earlier, we know that taxpayers can and will vote with their feet in search of economic opportunity. And so Florida has really become a top destination. I think during the pandemic, this really went into overdrive as Americans became more mobile. But places like Texas and Florida, I mean, you're talking about, millions of new residents moving in, hundreds of thousands each year. And of course, Florida is one of 9 states, Texas as well, 2 of the 9 states that don't even have a personal income tax. And that is obviously, that's a contributor to economic growth. All taxes have consequences. All taxes matter when it comes to economic growth. But in our research, we found that the income tax can be the biggest inhibitor there.
Lee, what were the bottom 2, 3, bottom handful of the states that didn't rank so well?
Yeah, we, the bottom 10 states this year were the same. The deck was shuffled a little bit,
right?
But the bottom states, New York came dead last again at number 50, and New York has been the bottom ranked state in all but 2 editions of our report. California is another state with a bottom 5 finish. Illinois, New Jersey, Vermont, and so just to zoom in on New York, for example, I was talking about North Carolina's tax reform, and New York has gone in the exact opposite approach. That New York is New York takes an approach, I would say, that's closer to Washington D.C. It's high tax, high spend, lean into those big government policies, and unfortunately, New York has lost nearly 2 million residents over the last 10 years, more than 200,000 last year alone. And we see this in California as well. Even the Los Angeles Times is talking about the California exodus, and they're trying to make sense of what's going on.
Right.
These states are actually losing representation in Congress. That's how bad it's gotten. In the latest census reapportionment, California lost a seat in Congress for the first time ever in state history since 1850, when it became a state. And New York has lost a couple of seats as well. And so, again, the rich states and the poor states, we learned some valuable lessons about what not to do when it comes to state economic policy.
It's crazy to think that two of the most populous states would be in the bottom two. But as you said, people are fleeing California like they're running from somebody. And I mean, New York, you have whole office buildings that basically are floors of whole office buildings empty because of people working differently now post-pandemic. Lee, what would you say that the kind of lesson from this to take is where North Carolina ranks versus some of these other states, and what would be the thing to continue to prosper from being a business friendly state and a state that performs in the top 10 level? What would be again the lessons to take from this, or the advice to take for this, or the info to glean from this survey?
Well, I tell you what, I grew up in North Carolina. I'm a Virginia resident now, and Virginia, I think what it showcases is that a state that has historically been very competitive can fall behind by standing still on economic policy. North Carolina has become the top destination for Virginians that are moving out of the state.
Yeah.
And I believe there's a good reason for that. But I think the overarching theme and one of the best takeaways from this report is to be more like states like North Carolina and Utah and Idaho, and less like California and New York and New Jersey, especially as getting little relief from our leaders here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
States have a great deal of control and impact on their own economic destinies. And so state legislators and state elected officials, there's a lot that they can do. And we hope that Rich States, Poor States is a guidebook to that path to prosperity.
Hey, really quickly, where does Virginia rank, out of curiosity?
Virginia has fallen to, I believe, middle of the pack this year.
Gotcha.
I believe in maybe 26th for Outlook. And that brings me to another good point. You can go to richstatespoorstates.org to find the detailed rankings.
Mm-hmm.
That's our website, richstatespoorstates.org. You can look back on all 17 years of data. You can compare North Carolina to any other state, and also look at the 15 variables that all are calculated to come up with our economic outlook rankings.
Hey, Lee, thanks a lot. Great to talk to you. Appreciate your time this morning. Fascinating information.
Thanks so much for having me.